Hello, Kobu 400 students. This is my effort to provide you with a summary of the key concepts from Chapter 10. Remember that the summaries that I provide to you are in no way deemed as substitutes for you reading the content that you can get from your ebook. So you're going to want to read the entirety of Chapter 10 from your ebook because remember you have a quiz on the content from the chapter, and then you also have a case quiz for Chapter 10. It's really based on you demonstrating understanding of the key content from this chapter. The Chapter 10 is really about how a firm can achieve competitive advantage at its corporate level. Remember, there are three levels of a firm. Firms have a corporate level, they have a business unit or a divisional level, and then they also have functional level. And then you can implement strategies at all three of those levels. Typically, though, you're going to be developing strategy at the corporate level and your business unit level. You also want to remember that competitive advantage is about when a firm's profitability is greater than the average profitability of firms within its industry. So that's the key pursuit of every firm, is the achievement of competitive advantage. And this chapter really looks at how firms can achieve competitive advantage through their corporate level strategy of diversification. So the first thing that you've got to understand is, what is the definition of diversification? So what is diversification? Process of a firm entering new industries distinct from a company's core or original industry. Oftentimes they do this to make new kinds of products that can be sold profitably to customers that are in these new industries. And so remember, diversification is the process of entering new industries. These are industries that are distinct from a company's core or original industry. And so you also need to understand, in addition to knowing what diversification is, remember it's a corporate level strategy where a firm is going to enter new industries distinct from its core or original industry. But you need to understand secondarily what a diversified company is. You need to be able to recognize that on your test. A diversified company is a company that makes and sells products in two or more different or distinct industries. So a diversified company could sell computer products and health foods. That's really distinct. Those are really distinct industries to be in. I just wanted to give you an example of a company that will be involved in diversification in two distinct industries so that you can see that these are two different industries. All right, so a company can make and sell products in two or more different or distinct industries. That's when you have a diversified company. Now, there are really four primary ways in which pursuing this diversification strategy can increase company profitability and lead it to achieving competitive advantage. And that's when a company can transfer competencies between business units in different industries, so they can transfer things that the firm can do in two different business units in different industries. They can leverage competencies to create business units in new industries. They can share resources between business units and realize synergies that will enable them to achieve economies of scope. And they can utilize general organizational competencies that increase the performance of a company's business units overall, which then will also lead the firm to achieve competitive advantage. So when you transfer competency, this would be the first strategy that a firm could pursue in order for them to achieve competitive advantage through diversification. When you transfer competencies, what you're going to do is you're going to take a distinctive competency, some specialized skill or capability that a firm has developed in one business unit in one industry, and then you're going to implant that in a business unit that a firm has that's operating in another industry. Your textbook gives you a really good example of when that's going to make sense for a company. That's going to make sense when a company has commonality of a skill or particular attribute that allows both businesses to operate more effectively and efficiently and create more value for customers. Really, the basis of choosing transferring competencies as your strategy for diversification would be commonality, and that would be when shared by two or more business units, that it would allow a company to operate more effectively and create more value for customers. You often will have similarities in the way that the two different business units operating in two distinct industries um, function, or there could even be some similarity in their target customers. And so the example that is provided in your textbook is one where Philip Morris transfers competency that they have in marketing and sales over the competencies that they have in marketing and sales over to the brewing industry, which is a separate industry in which they operate. And then what you have there is a commonality in that both alcohol and tobacco are recreational substances, and so they can, the advertising strategies and marketing strategies and core customers can be similar. There's some overlap. And so what they've done is for them to save essentially on some of the costs associated with marketing and sales to similar customers, is that they were able to transfer competencies from the tobacco industry over to the brewing industry. Another strategy that you can employ when you choose to go into a distinct industry from the one in which you originally operated or primarily operated is that you can leverage your competencies. And so you can take a distinctive competency that you developed in one business unit, and then you create a new business unit that really focuses on the savings that you have from already having developed competency over time in one particular area. And so it's really much even more of a cost savings focus than even transferring competencies. You decided to create this entirely new business unit because you know that you're going to experience some significant cost savings in your value chain from creating this new business unit. So there are two other strategies that firms can utilize when they're pursuing diversification. Another one is that you could share resources and capabilities, and really the basis of that choice and strategy is economies of scope, which arise when one or more of a diversified company's business units are able to realize cost saving or differentiation synergies because they can more effectively pool, share, and utilize expensive resources or capabilities. And then your fourth strategy is going to be utilizing general organizational competencies. So far, what you need to know for this chapter is you need to understand what diversification is. Then you also need to be able to readily recognize a diversified company. And then in case you get an essay question on why a firm would choose a specific strategy for diversification, or what the four main strategies are for diversification, then you need to know what those four main strategies are: transferring competencies across businesses, leveraging competencies to create a new business, sharing resources and capabilities, and then utilizing general organizational competencies. So far, those are what you need to know. You also need to know that there are two types of diversification. Diversification can be related, or diversification can be unrelated. So remember, diversification itself is when a firm chooses to enter an industry that is separate and distinct from the industry in which it's currently operating, right? But they can choose to enter an industry that is related to the one in which they're currently operating. When you say related, we mean it's related in terms of having some value chain functions that are related, or commonality in terms of customer base, or similarity in terms of need it solves for customers. It could be a related diversification choice. Or firms can engage in unrelated diversification. And this is when a firm is going to enter a business that is completely unrelated or significantly unrelated to the industry in which they initially or primarily operated. Your textbook gives you more in-depth information on why firms would choose related or diversification. It also gives you more in-depth information on which of the strategies it makes most sense for firms to pursue. And obviously, it's going to depend upon macro environmental factors. It's also going to depend upon the resource capabilities of the firms, the resources and capabilities of the firms. And so there are variant factors that will lead to a firm choosing either related diversification or unrelated diversification, or choosing which strategy to employ should they go into diversification. But the key terms and concepts that you need to know from this chapter are: what is the definition of diversification? You need to know and readily be able to recognize what a diversified company is. Then you need to know the four main strategies for pursuing diversification. You need to know that there are two distinct types of diversification, and that's related and unrelated. Also in this chapter, you're first introduced to the concept or the definition for economies of scope. Remember, we've talked about economies of scale, which is when firms can experience cost savings because of mass production. And what ends up happening is their cost per unit goes down because they engage in mass production. You're introduced in this textbook to the concept of economies of scope. And economies of scope are cost savings that a firm can experience firm-wide, obviously, but because of their engagement in multiple industries or activities. So economies of scope is similar to economies of scale, that they're both focused on cost savings, but economies of scale is related to cost savings that you or firm experience related to mass production or producing multiple units, which drives down their cost per unit. Remember, because there's some fixed costs that don't go up regardless of the scale of production, ends up allowing the firm to achieve economies of scale. But with economies of scope, firms can also experience cost savings because, remember, we talked about shared organizational competencies and even shared activities across business units when they choose to engage in diversification. I hope this summary of the key concepts and terms from the chapter is helpful to you. Remember to read the chapter in its entirety and to actually complete the assignments that are available to you on Blackboard. Best to you.